All right, we are going to transition to our first panel. So I'd invite our first panelists to make their way to the stage. Executive committee members, except Jackie, Patrick, and I, are going to move down to the front table. And the remainder of the meeting, and as we do that, I'll just talk a little bit. The remainder of the meeting is comprised of two panels. The first is this community wildfire preparedness panel, which is one of the three legs of the stool that Patrick presented. And we've got a great set of panelists that Patrick will introduce. Then we're going to take a short break, and then we'll follow up with our landscape resilience panel, which is, of course, something we've really focused on over the last 5 years and something we're evolving in this new action plan. And then we'll spend about a half an hour to reflect on the panels and the plan and have a closing conversation before we end at 12:30. So with that, Patrick, as we transition, why don't I? The right place? Yeah, I think we are. All right. Here we can scoot down. Okay. We okay? All right.
Thanks, Wade. So the way we've got this organized is we're going to have Chief Berlant, our state's fire marshal, give you an overview of the community preparedness section of the plan. And then we have several distinguished folks here to help inform the conversation about the overall framework that Chief Berlant's going to present so that we can draw out from them some of the key issues and opportunities that are there. We have with us Jana Valakovic from UC Ag and Natural Resources, Tony Anderson, our executive officer from the Board of Forestry, Joe Nordlinger, sorry, Joe, from Napa Firewise, and Mike O'Connell from the Irvine Ranch Conservancy. So Chief Berlant, take it away.
All right. Well, good morning again, everybody. Daniel Berlant, California State Fire Marshal. And as California continues to face increasingly severe wildfire conditions, our responsibility, as I mentioned at the opening, is not only to respond to wildfires after they start, along with our local and our federal and our tribal partners. Our responsibility is to help communities prepare, adapt, and become more resilient before disaster strikes. And that is really why the draft action plan, that really exciting to finally see it released this morning, really focuses on community wildfire preparedness as a core tenet of our state's overall wildfire and resilience strategy. This effort really recognizes a simple reality, and that is that wildfire resilience cannot be achieved through a single action. Secretary, you often say there's not a silver bullet. It is an all of the above. It requires a coordinated statewide effort that addresses really three interconnected components: home hardening, defensible space, and then neighborhood scale mitigation, whether that be firewise, whether that be fuel breaks and green belts in and around these communities. Focusing in first here on home hardening, for nearly 20 years, California, we have maintained some of the nation's strongest wildfire building standards for new construction in wildfire-prone areas. And these standards work. I love the science advisory kind of kicking this off because science is what has backed up the requirements that are in this code. And studies following major wildfires have repeatedly demonstrated that homes built to the modern wildfire resilient standards survive at a significantly higher rate. But most homes that are built most homes that are at risk, I should say, were built before these standards. And so the challenge really in front of us is how do we retrofit them? And that is really where this term home hardening comes in to play. Here you can see just a few of the elements of home hardening and some of the features that we talk about when we talk about what a more resilient home or a hardened home looks like. That second component, though, is defensible space. And defensible space includes, first, the ember-resistant zone that my colleague Tony Anderson will talk more about here, that zone 0 immediately around structures. But effectively, defensible space is removing dead or dying vegetation around a structure itself, removing combustible items. And it really is one of the most effective tools that is available to our homeowners. Creating and maintaining these buffers around the structure reduces fire intensity, It interrupts the fire spread. It stops the pathway of fires. That's something we saw in Los Angeles, is that really the fire was spread from home to home because of these flammable pathways, whether that was interconnected wood fencing, whether that was shrubs that, again, connected the homes. But this buffer of defensible space for us provides a place for our firefighters to take a more safer operational stance against a wildfire. That last component, though, that I mentioned is really neighborhood scale mitigation. Wildfire preparedness does not stop at the property line. Communities survive together, or they don't survive at all. And that is why programs like FireWise USA, Fire Safe Councils, fuel reduction projects that are at the neighborhood scale, evacuation route improvements, and shaded fuel breaks all recognize that wildfire resiliency must occur collectively. Now, again, I come back to the science theme. Research and our post-fire analysis continue to confirm to us that these three mitigations together, along with a healthy surrounding landscape, like a fuel break or prescribed fire, or forest health restoration, all have to occur simultaneously. These principles were highlighted. Secretary, you brought up the recent published Senate Bill 254 Natural Disaster Resiliency Study. And that report emphasized that community scale mitigation with cross-sector coordination are essential to reducing catastrophic losses. And so that is where we get into our existing coordination effort that will be the foundation of our work and that we will build upon it. Our work at the Cal Fire Ops State Fire Marshal already reflects the policy that the SB 254 report has laid out. Each month, we convene a wildfire mitigation advisory committee. Several members on the executive committee, many of the organizations here in this room today make up this group, where we bring together representatives from the building, the insurance, utility industries, our tribal governments, our fire departments, our local governments, researchers, and community partners, all to coordinate the activities and now to advance the key actions within this plan. So together, these partners already form a statewide system focused on ensuring communities have the tools they need to withstand wildfire. This coalition, as I mentioned, is going to form the foundation of the work group that will help operationalize the key actions that are within the draft plan. The group is going to advance a coordinated statewide effort supporting a more holistic, multi-domain approach to reducing wildfire impacts. And again, this effort establishes, as you can see on here, statewide goals. That's the first piece here. What are we trying to achieve? Developing a common data standards, ensuring that we're all talking in the same language when we talk about data sharing. Building local capacity, whether that be at the county level, whether that be in local communities, but ultimately coordinating this effort at the county level. And I mentioned this in our December meeting as well. When I say county level, it does not necessarily mean as hard as our county governments work. This is at the boundary of the 58 counties. It has been the perfect place for us to coordinate this effort. This is what we build upon with our existing Wildfire County Coordinator Program. Some sit in county government, some sit in fire safe councils that you'll hear earlier, some sit at other nonprofit organizations and conservancies. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all. But when we talk about county level coordination, we use those 58 counties really as the boundary for the strategic planning. Now, this action plan also calls for new statewide standards for collecting data on structural vulnerability as well as risk reduction modeling. Better data will help us identify the greatest risk, evaluate our mitigation projects consistently, and prioritize investments. One of my favorite sayings these days, we've invested a lot of money, but there are a lot of projects that are not necessarily strategic. We have to really make sure that we're funding in a strategic manner in the work that we do. So to achieve this scale, we want to build upon, as I mentioned, the successful Wildfire County Coordinator Program that's administered by our partners at the California Fire Safe Council. We want to strengthen local capacity to implement preparedness actions across 58 counties. Now, counties, we believe, and I defer to my supervisor colleagues here to back this up. We believe counties are the best positioned for this kind of regional level planning. County level community wildfire protection plans that are already in existence, you'll hear from our colleague in Napa, have really shown success as really being the central platform for identifying priorities at the community level, integrating the mitigation projects, supporting evacuation planning, and actions with kind of a broader state of objectives. Another key element, though, in the plan is the strategy of preventing unwanted fires before they spark. Many of California's most destructive fires begin not in remote forests, but along roadsides, utility corridors, or other developed areas. So preventing these ignitions is one of the most effective ways for us to reduce wildfire impacts in the first place. And utilities will continue to implement their wildfire mitigation plans that harden infrastructure and reduce ignition risk, all while state and local partners improve ignition data collection, vegetation management, and efforts to reduce human-caused fires. You'll hear from a colleague here from the Irvine Conservancy to talk about programs such as the Southern California Ignition Reduction Program. Serves as a model for the coordination efforts here in fire prevention, and they already are showing dramatic improvements. So really, in closing, the community wildfire preparedness actions that are within the draft action plan represent a comprehensive and really a practical roadmap for living more safely with wildfire. And as the SB 254 report concluded, success will require layered protection across parcels, across neighborhoods, and across landscapes, all supported by common data standards, county level planning, technical assistance, and resources. The strategy combines science, planning infrastructure improvements, landscape management, public health preparedness, and community engagements as a unified approach. So the actions here are clear: to harden homes and neighborhoods, to create and maintain defensible space, including the Zone 0 protections, to strengthen local capacity, coordination, and project planning, to improve evacuation readiness and smoke preparedness, to prevent unwanted ignitions, to strategically manage landscapes and communities, and to build partnerships, data systems, and accountability measures necessary for a long-term success. I am out of breath just listing all of those things. And so the task at hand for us is mighty, but wildfire is a permanent part of our California landscape, but catastrophic community destruction does not have to happen. So working together, we can create safer, stronger, and more resilient communities prepared for the next wildfire. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chief Bland. A mighty task. I'm going to turn to Yana. Okay, this looks like a sound science-based approach that we've talked about, but you're on the front lines out there in communities. How is this playing? What's the interplay between the evolving science and diverse communities who may have a different view of how well this is going?
Well, thank you for the introduction and for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. So how is this playing? It's interesting. I will say that some communities feel really ready to engage, probably those 1,000 or so Firewise communities, and other communities are not in that space yet. And, you know, I think you can think about all the things that are on your to-do list in life, and fire fits within somewhere between your advanced directives, taking the garbage out, and, you know, did you remember to get the cat food? I mean, there's, you know, this challenge of the immediacy and the crisis. And, you know, Chief Berlant did a fantastic job laying out the big picture. And I'll add, you know, a couple of thoughts to this. You know, why do we prioritize community mitigation? And that's largely because, you know, wildfires impact communities across the state, you know, regardless of the vegetation type. You know, they hit grasslands, they hit chaparral, they hit woodlands, they hit forests. But for many communities, they just think it's a singular vegetation type, and they think it doesn't apply to them. And they don't recognize the flammability of the built environment and the fact that we built our landscapes and our the places that we inhabit with our homes in a way that wasn't designed for wildfire. So we're struggling to try and come to that reality. And within that, you know, there are a lot of debate over the last year as to how buildings survive. And I just want to, you know, frame it in this way. We talked about fuel under Chief Berlant, this idea, the disconnection and the reduction of fuel between the house and the property. We've talked about structure hardening and this, you know, idea that we have to be prepared for not just flames coming at the house, but also embers and this issue of radiant heat that can break windows. But really, the underpinning of that is homeowner maintenance. And, as homeowners, we have rights and we have responsibilities. And I think as a group of collected, empowered people that are excited about these topics, I don't think we've done a great job understanding how to communicate that right and responsibility around maintenance. And that's a real challenge. I mean, people want help, but they are struggling to try and figure out what's within their control. And we certainly have done for decades, really promote our fire services and, pin how important, quick fire response is. But in that process, I think we've taken away some of that sense of their own personal responsibility in that moment. So, where you live matters and how you feel about fire risk. I think we can all sort of look at that image of a coniferous forest and see the dead trees related to drought mortality and go, oh, of course, there's fire issues there. But then when we start to look at especially these new planned communities and these built environments in the suburban and urban situations, and we don't always see the fire risk or understand that mitigations matter at that scale and in these environments too. It's pretty easy to say this is someone else's problem, someone else's environment that we should be worried about. What communities really struggle with is sort of what's hard to see. They don't see the risks and the vulnerabilities in their structures, as illustrated by the flames being, captured underneath those eaves. They don't see the role of vegetation and other fuels that can aid in transmitting fire. I mean, here's a block wall. This is from Southern California, this idea that block wall might protect radiant heat, but it's not that pretty. And so we cover it in a trailing vine, and that trailing vine can just move the fire right down that block wall and directly to the structure. And then in the post-fire environment, we don't really know how to see what happened. In the example on the right, a community member took me to this place and talked to me about how the shrubs saved this house. And when I walked around, I said, well, let's get out and walk around. And when I walked around, I went, wow, look here at the ember ignition of this vegetation right at the structure. And then let's take a moment and thank and appreciate that someone was here to put out that fire. They didn't see the line of the water coming down. They didn't see the evidence that someone had been there to do something. So, as we start to think about accelerating pace and scale in community response, it requires a deep understanding in behavioral change science and in understanding what motivates people. There's been a number of recent polls, one by the California Insurance Agency, CSAA, that did looked at 2,900 participants. A good percentage of them are from California. And, what people really do is they don't see the urgency and the threat. They understand some of the language, they're improving in their language understanding, but they don't see themselves always in it. And there's this great term called optimism bias, this idea that, I put my seatbelt on today, but I'm not likely to be in an accident anyway. So this, great hope that it's not going to be the day that comes in this environment. So as we go forward, I just want to say that the action plan is a really good effort towards understanding complex issues that require complex solutions. What's really important are the trusted experts and who are the good messengers, and that is not the same person in every community. I think we also struggle a lot around mitigation priorities. They're not completely aligned. We haven't socially understood them. We've got a lot of research to do in different building types. And there's more work to be done. Language really matters. Daniel and I talk about this a lot. Urban conflagrations are a term we've used a lot this year. They're highly defeating. People don't feel a sense that you can ever work through those issues. Visuals are really essential. Much of what I do is talk with pictures, and you'll see some work by Tony Anderson and the board in a moment around trying to help communicate what Zone Zero looks like. And it wasn't until we got better visuals that people began to understand what we were talking about and that it wasn't substantial change. But there's also barriers for willingness to change. And we have to understand that we got to hold people's hands and accept the pace that they're working at and help them see that vision of the future where we are a fire adapted California, where it's okay that there can be fire in the wildland and we're not in a place of ultimate panic and fear, that prescribed fire is not going to lead to wildfire, that we can work hand in hand with fire. But, as I wrap up, people really want help. And that help comes in many different forms. Sometimes it's just someone to listen to and someone to yell at, and sometimes it's someone to come and help, use some clippers and maybe add some new screening. But they also want a sense of hope. And I think that's what we really need to be careful around. We need to really express that there is a pathway through this, that there is a way that we're going to move to a more fire adapted future, that your children will have a chance to live in California, that your assets that are tied up in your home will be sustained, that you will have insurance going forward, that we will work through this this difficult moment. And so I'll just wrap up by thanking all the drafters of the plan, because the plan really supports key partners and really underpins the importance of education and teams. And I just want to thank and appreciate that we get called out, and the University of California Ag and Natural Resources Fire Network, where we serve as some of those key communicators. We are great liaisons to communities, and we're really innovative problem solvers. So we as a team are really grateful to work with you all and continue to work through these difficult issues.
Thank you, Yana. That was really insightful. And I also just want to thank you personally for your help with the task force. It's one thing to get the science right. It's another to build public awareness, to translate that science into action. And so love to hear more as we proceed about how you're dealing with that. And Tony, that brings us to you. Zone Zero is obviously a foundation of this plan. Talk to us about the role of the board, how Zone Zero is going, and how you're grappling with some of the issues that Yana has highlighted.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick, and thank you to Yana and Chief Berlant as well. So I think if I'm going to condense different pieces from Yana and Chief Berlant's presentations, it's that there's a formula that we are putting in place, right, to move from a wildfire crisis and the risk that is posed to improvement and to reducing the risk to communities. And if I'm just going to outline those, I'm hearing community education and outreach, community organizing, mobilization, best practice support in the inspection process, the 250,000 inspections that Chief Berlant's team performs every year, land use planning and the long list of plans that help guide this work, and then of course grant funding, the resources and the funding to make it happen. That is a lot. Those are a number of concentric circles that must come together to create change. One thing that sometimes we don't talk about is the spirit of durability that is included in that process, adding to that formula. Durability and providing a clear step-by-step playbook for communities to do this. And that's where the regulatory process becomes involved. So hence enter the Board of Forestry and fire protection. I put an underline under the "and" because sometimes we shorthand the board as the Board of Forestry. However, we are the Board of Forestry in fire protection, and we have a great infrastructure as part of our regulatory process to support that for California. We have a great land use program. We have what's called a resource protection committee that's chaired by board member Jay Lopez. I don't know if he's here today to tackle just these issues. And so we are also the defensible space. We oversee defensible space regulations for the state of California, of which Zone Zero is included in that. And we were tasked, as a quick look back, we were tasked both by the legislature and through Governor Newsom's executive order in February 2025, following the LA fires, to tackle the regulatory process for Zone Zero. The board immediately stood up a process following that executive order, and since then we've held nearly 20 public workshops, town halls, and walking tours. The walking tours were incredibly valuable, getting out on the ground, visiting neighborhoods, visiting with community members about their concerns. Thousands of public comments. We've kept our public comment period open throughout this process so that folks have direct access to this process throughout. And I can say myself and my staff, we read every single one of those comments, sometimes probably to the detriment of my staff who are in the back of the room going, "Tony, that was an extra level of detail that adds a lot of time, but I really appreciate it." And there's been hundreds of community conversations. This leads us to the latest draft of a rule package that combines the key values you've heard from Chief Berlant, the science that you've heard from Yana, and we really tried to thread the needle on three key values, which are fire safety, top priority. Also practicality, though. We want to make sure that this rule package is affordable and that it's enforceable. The inspectors out on the ground, we want to make sure that they have a level of discretion and flexibility to be able to apply as they work with communities to make incremental progress. And we also want to apply as the third value is local flexibility. We know that California is not a one-size-fits-all state. We've seen the regions, we've seen, the different landscape types, different community types. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So we want to give communities the flexibility to make the decisions that they need to make. So informed by science, professional experience, and community input, the Cliff Notes versions of where the current rule plead is at is essentially outlined in this visual right here. The key, the new concept that we are introducing is what's called a safety zone or an ember resistant zone. And throughout our public process, we heard that folks really want to see the built environment integrated into these rules. And so knowing that the area under the eaves is one of the most vulnerable areas during an ember-driven fire, we created a zone. I termed it the safety zone. That's kind of caught on. Yana would roll her eyes a bit and say that is an ember-resistant zone, which is totally fair. And it asks that homeowners not have any combustible materials under that eave area. We're also allowing trees. So trees are allowed in the current Zone 0 rule package. We just ask that they be 5 foot away from the structure, or that they not be under the safety zone, that they be 10 feet away from chimneys, and they be trimmed back 10 feet above your roof line. Non-woody vegetation is allowed within Zone 0. That's potted plants up to 1.5 feet. That's also non-woody vegetation up to 1.5 feet. Again, not under the safety zone. Gates, decks, and fences are allowed. Gates, we ask that gates be non-combustible. So that area where a gate touches your home from your fence, we ask that you would replace a wooden fence for a non-combustible fence. That may be a metal fence or another option. Fences are allowed, decks are allowed. No new fences are allowed. So as you get to a place where maybe you need to replace your fence, then we would ask that be a non-combustible fence. In terms of logistics, through a series of conversations, we have outlined a 5-year phase-in period. So that's broken up in 2 parts. That would be a 3-year phase-in for what might be considered some of the easier steps, raking wood mulch, clearing dead and dying vegetation from around your home, adjusting your vegetation allowances in your Zone 0 space. And then the second 2-year phase-in period for a total of 5 years, you would start implementing the safety zone around your home. You would replace your gates, et cetera, et cetera. So that is, we're working with local communities to help implement that. And of course, it is not a final draft rule plead yet. This will go to our board subcommittee middle of this month to decide whether or not we're going to forward this to the full board. Likely in August. So again, on the enforceable piece, it's about education, outreach, and not penalties. During that 5-year period, you can see inspectors working with homeowners to come up with a game plan, to work through that process, to access resources, to access assistance, and really build those key relationships with inspectors. Lastly, I just want to thank the board. I want to thank the board staff. And I want to thank a great partnership with Chief Berlant's team on helping get this incredible amount of work to where it is.
Thank you, Tony. And board consideration is?
What's that?
Board consideration of Zone 0 is coming up?
Yeah, so June 16th? It'll be before the Zone 0 board subcommittee. They will be considering whether or not to forward this to the full board. If it does get forwarded to the full board, then it would be considered by the board in August.
Great.
August of this summer.
All right. Thanks for that update. Now we're going to turn to folks on the ground. Chief Berlant talked a lot about the importance of counties and using county-based plans as a framework for pulling together all this disparate activity that needs to happen. Joe Norglinger is here from Napa County to showcase how Napa is leading the way.
Thanks so much, Patrick. Thanks to the task force for having us here, and thanks to all of our funders. We have many of our funders here: Cal Fire, for U.S. Forest Service, Napa County, BLM, indeed. So I'm just going to take a little bit of time here to talk about how Napa County has organized our wildfire resilience effort, and then a specific initiative that we're driving that ties in really nicely with the regional efforts. Quick story: 2017, 2020, total of 5 catastrophic fires, burned 65% of the county, billions of dollars of losses, people dying. Terrible set of tragedies. Napa County organizes. We basically pursue a county-wide CWPP with some funds from Cal Fire. And really that effort was to address what we see as sort of the 2 primary challenges with wildfire. It's very unique peril. And those 2 challenges are fragmentation and complacency. So when we looked at it, we felt like there was a need to drive a consolidated effort, and that sort of gets to our model to really drive comprehensive wildfire resilience at a countywide level. And so, we found that also that fragmentation leads to complacency. If you have too many fire safe councils that aren't actually driving or accomplishing projects on the ground, they tend to get complacent. You have 5-6 years that go by without a major wildfire. People start to lose interest. So we've really worked to do a number of things that align really nicely with the task force action plan that I want to highlight. A little bit about my background. I come from private sector. My background is building large consulting companies, professional services firms. When we, in 2017, looked at, after our first set of catastrophic wildfires, we basically decided that we wanted to build a model in Napa. And we took Napa Firewise to develop a shared services platform. And so really what we were looking for is structural efficiency. And the private sector part of my brain said, hey, we need to build a shared services platform that can support multiple fire safe councils, but do it in a way that doesn't result in a lot of redundant overhead and infrastructure. So Napa Firewise is kind of this shared services platform that really manages the entire project portfolio. At the time that in 2017, there were 6 fire safe councils. We now have 25, 23 of them are NFPA Firewise designated communities. Every single one of those fire safe councils has a CWPP. All of those CWPPs roll up into a countywide CWPP. So Napa Firewise essentially manages the back-end infrastructure for all of these fire safe councils. They're our connective tissue into the community. We manage the entire project portfolio, all the project development and the implementation. We handle the care and feeding of all these fire safe councils to make sure that we support them with outreach and education. They're our connective tissue into the community. They help us to push information out, and they drive really strong feedback loops so that we're executing accordingly. We essentially handle all the grants administration, all the grants application on behalf of all the fire safe councils. That consolidates things and allows our funders to basically deal with a primary point of contact. We handle all the environmental compliance, soup to nuts, notice of exemptions, CalVTP PSAs, et cetera. And then we do all that back-end vendor management, contract, procurement, et cetera, that really sort of takes a lot of the heavy lift out of it so that our fire safe councils can focus on their highest and best value, which is really acting as that connective tissue into the community. There's a particular initiative that we've been driving in Napa. It's called our Valley Stewards Initiative. This gets to the larger regional play. We worked this out with the unit, the LNU Cal Fire unit, and essentially what the initiative does is it says, hey, we need to move beyond all the boilerplate elements of wildfire resilience, wildfire preparedness, landscape level resilience, defensible space. Those are all really critical things, but we have to figure out a way to scale this because, again, fire doesn't care about a jurisdictional boundary. And so essentially what we did is we worked with the county, the unit to develop a standard. It's called an Enhanced Resilience Site Standard. And it allows us to go out and work with large rural landowners that by virtue of where their properties are topographically, they have ridge tops, spur ridges, wide open saddles and benches. We can map critical resilience elements that are important for firefighters to drive better containment outcomes. So we essentially worked with a lot of different landowners, pulled together focus groups, dozens of large landowners, and told them, hey, if we could get out there and map critical resilience elements, where your eroded infrastructure is, where you've done fuel mitigation historically, where you have water stores, where there are staging areas, Would you be interested in participating in this program? 100% of them said yes. So essentially what we figured out is there were large landowners that had critical properties. They had done tremendous investments in resilience work. Nobody knew about it. There were other large landowners that had the means to make these investments, but they needed basically some incentive to do this work. And then there were landowners that are property wealthy, means challenged. So we essentially worked on a mix of different funding, donations, grants that folks were eligible for, and then we helped landowners to make these investments. And that's allowed us to build these enhanced resilience sites. They're detailed geospatially mapped areas that are critical for wildfire containment outcomes. We map these things in detail, working closely with the landowner, and then we take that data and we integrate it into Tablet Command, which is the onboard tablet software platform that's on all the apparatus. A lot of people may not realize that when there's a large conflagration, a lot of time is spent doing discovery and exploratory work. We're trying to shorten that cycle. We want firefighters to know exactly where they can go geospatially on the onboard tablet to do better containment operations. So we map these detailed layers. That drives better containment outcomes. We actually have 3 fires that have resulted in better outcomes: the Toll Fire, the Long Fire, and the Picket Fire. All of those fires resulted in no structure loss, relatively rapid containment, and they utilized the pre-fire work that we'd done, the critical mapped elements that we needed, because firefighters knew where they could go to access certain kinds of things, run backfiring operations, call in more effective retardant drops, et cetera. We then took it a step further and said, hey, who are our customers? Our customers are landowners. Our customers are firefighters. Our customers also are insurers. And we worked with about 50 different insurance companies, admitted, not admitted, excess and surplus. CAL FIRE gave us a direct award. We worked out this standard so that the insurance companies understood the value of it. And that has now resulted in, with the certificate given to the landowner that is good for 1 year. We're working with insurers. We've done about 20 different renewals, and those renewals all resulted in substantial reductions in premiums, better coverage. We've gotten about a half dozen people off the FAIR plan. So we're seeing it translate into better outcomes on the insurance side as well. So all of this is to say that when we think about our countywide strategy, we want to develop standards and best practices that we can take into the region, the unit, and we're seeing some really good outcomes with the support of all of our funders to do this work. And I'll pass it on to Michael.
Thank you, Joe. Before we get to Michael, Chief Berland, not every county has NAPA's funding, NAPA's sophistication. But what's your message to the smaller rural counties, fire safe councils who might not be organized that way? How are you dealing with that tremendous diversity in the state?
Yeah, it can't be a one size fits all, as has already been mentioned here. Alpine County is mighty, but they are a small population. And then you have Los Angeles County that is so large that it is going to be very difficult at that scale for all of the communities and all the cities and all those projects to roll up. That is why the county coordinator program has really not been a one size fits all. We didn't go to the county and say, here's your person. We looked to see where's the right place for it to sit. Is it in a fire safe council? Is it an RCD? Is it in county government? And so that is really how we look at overall the planning effort to be as well, that there has to be consistency, but there has to be flexibility.
All right, our final speaker, Michael O'Connell, who's appeared before. Give us a flavor of the Southern California perspective on all this.
Certainly. Thank you, Director Wright. Urban Ranch Conservancy is based in Orange County, and we manage 32,000 acres of highly fire-prone urban wildland. We are also the RFFC grantee for our region, and we're also the county coordinator for Orange County. So we're kind of in the eye of the storm, and the whole thing gives us a very practical perspective on everything. I first need to express our gratitude for what the task force has done, particularly over the last 5 years. Director Wright, you know that for 5 years I've been shouting into the void about the differences in Southern California, and I was standing outside this morning with some of my colleagues from around the state, partners, and we were talking about what it was about the task force that has changed things. And it's the idea of how seriously and how sincerely and how honestly this task force has approached it. And frankly, as a Californian, I'm proud of this policy development process because it's the way that this should work. So compliments to Secretary Crowfoot and everyone on the task force for handling it in this way. The open-mindedness has allowed us to really address these things that have now become sort of common knowledge. The two game changers, as far as we're concerned, are that historically, this was viewed as a monolithic problem. And I won't even go into that because we know it's not now. But that has led to policies that have not worked well in Southern California, which is very unconventional. And historically, it's been a very top-down approach. So this idea of working through the regions and almost a ground-up approach, but managed and contained by the task force and the action plan is really the right way to go. So I'll skip through that. You saw this slide earlier. One of the major changes is this emphasis on regions, and the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program has done an outstanding job of empowering regions and you can even see in Southern California, they're different sizes geographically. Orange County, we're very compact, but we have a population of over 3 million people. And so there's a lot of high fire hazard severity zones there. And the alignment caused by this statewide action plan is really, really critical. The next steps that we think need to happen are that the funding and some of the policy elements need to catch up to the way that the task force has handled this. We're still, this is a process to develop these policies, and it's going to take some time, but the recognition is really important. So Southern California is different. It's also really complicated. It's not primarily a forest health issue. Shrublands are 13% of the state, but they're over 50% of Southern California. We do have really special forests that have a different issue. Our sky islands are highly biodiverse. This picture says it all to me in terms of the challenge we have, particularly in shrublands, and that it's our fire return interval is highly abnormal. It's interesting because if you think about it, around the state, wildfire is sort of the common denominator for change of all of these protected lands. And I want to put in a plug for wildlands here. We're talking about keeping communities safe and all those things, and it's absolutely correct. But we have spectacular wildlands that we've spent billions of dollars on in the state historically, and they are also under threat. Wildlands aren't the threat. They are also under threat. For whether it's a forest in the Sierra, whether it's the giant sequoias, or whether it's coastal shrublands, wildfire is the big problem, but it's different in different places. So you can see in this picture, this is what happens when you get too much fire in shrublands. In the lower right-hand corner, that's 3 fires in a period of 20 years. And we get this death spiral of type conversion from healthy native shrublands that are frankly harder to ignite and harder to burn to grasses that are a real problem. Our other challenge is we're not talking about primarily a landscape scale fuels issue here. When we talk about fuels management, we talk about strategic fuels management. It might be a strategic fuel break. It might be a defensible space around a community, but it's not landscape scale fuels issue. We have an ignition problem and we have a wind problem. 90% of our damage in Southern California is done in only 10% of the fires, like the Palisades fire, like the Eaton fire. Most of the ignitions that occur don't happen during wind periods, and so they are kept small. CAL FIRE does a fantastic job of keeping them to 10 acres or less, which is the statewide policy. But when the wind is blowing and you get an ignition, all bets are off. This is a map of the ignitions in Orange County since 1991 to 2020, which is when this was updated. It literally maps the roadway system in the county. This is where our fire ignitions are occurring. That's difficult, but it also, there's your leverage. If we can prevent ignitions during high wind events, that is most of our problem. So that's what we need to focus on. So what is Southern California doing to address these things, particularly the C program promoting planning and doing it appropriate for each of those areas? Frankly, there's different plans in Riverside than there is in Orange County, than there is in San Diego County, but we're all working together as a coordinated region. And then we mentioned the Southern California Ignition Reduction Program, which is a precedent-setting collaboration of the Resources Agency and CAL FIRE and the Forest Service and Caltrans to actually aggressively reduce ignitions along roadways. You're going to hear more about that in the second panel, so I won't talk too much about it. But the actions that are now necessary, that we know are necessary in Southern California, are starting to become part, not only of the conversation, but part of the plan. Ignition prevention, strategic fuels management, and community and structured preparedness. Also, one other thing we're working on in the region is ultra early detection and response. There are some emerging technologies that you'll be hearing more about in the coming couple of years that are not based on cameras and analog line of sight. They're based on sensor technology that can detect not only a fire as it starts, but also fires that haven't been fully extinguished that might reignite and start another catastrophic fire. We've had that happen several times. So again, what a privilege to be part of this process. Thank you so much for your leadership, and we're excited to see what happens next.
Thank you, Michael. Back to you, Executive Committee.
Great. Yeah, in a moment, I'll just turn it over to other executive committee members with questions. But big thanks to all the panelists. It's exciting to see the progress, and particularly Joe and Michael in your specific regions. I think you're really leading the way on how we can achieve meaningful improvements in risk reduction. I think that's what we need to do. To me, this draft action plan has a big challenge before it, which is how do we achieve comparable scale in communities that we've achieved across landscapes in the last 5 years. You know, this task force has been very focused on landscapes. It's part of the name of our task force. And I think we can feel good about the surge that we've achieved, measured by acres treated. I agree that as it relates to landscapes, we're gonna evolve beyond just acres treated to other outcome measures. But I think what has been challenging is how do we achieve similar scale and identify risk reduction in a much more decentralized environment, which is millions of parcels or millions of residents across these communities. Yet the firestorms of Los Angeles have demonstrated that this is a challenge that we have to effectively confront. The fact is, if we don't, fires can continue that become, wildland fires become urban fires, and we see the public safety and property destruction that we experienced in Los Angeles. So I appreciate, and I think we're on the right track with trying to really create more level activity across counties. I'm interested in my county colleagues if they, it sounds like they feel like that's the right scale. I think Joe and Napa, you guys may be an exemplar of really taking a county approach. Design principles that I took from your presentation are really a county level backbone for the more localized community organizations like the Firewise communities. Avoid reinventing the wheel, providing that level of sophistication, specifically real tools to understand how to reduce risk in communities. We know it can't be, uneven, sort of random acts of home hardening, but you actually have to achieve some sort of critical mass. And I know our fire marshal and his team are really focused on tools that communities can use to figure out where they prioritize those in-community mitigations and what critical mass do they actually have to achieve. And then I think just your ability to impact insurance rates is a bit of the golden ring. We know the insurability crisis is driven by the catastrophic wildfire crisis, and how can we actually make a difference to our residents, to Supervisor Cottrell's point, to start us off. So I'm excited about this. I think we've got a good start to a framework, but whether it's this, large committee that Jan and others serve on, I think we really have to get into the nub of just how do we achieve scale, both within neighborhoods, so it's truly risk reduction, and then more broadly across counties in the state.
Yeah, thank you so much to this great panel. And thank you, Joe, for driving over from Napa to share some of what's happening there. Just to first reflect back, I think one of the key things we've heard from the panel is, you mentioned complacency, Joe, and you talked about, Jana, optimism bias. And what I also see in the community is kind of a paralysis of uncertainty. Like, I know I need to do some things, but I don't know where to start. And so I think those are challenges. And what we're hearing from the Board of Forestry, we are going to have a stick out there eventually, which will be some motivator. And so how do we build in some carrots as well? But I wanted to go to you, Chief Berlant, because one of the things that I heard on this tour in Lake County, where we got to see a lot of this home hardening, a couple things. First of all, so often residents were not interested until they saw their neighbor's home, right? So how do you get those first homes in? But then second, this concept of, and we probably need a better term for it, but the super spreader home, which is one home that is perhaps creating more risk for the community, not because of the conditions of the home so much as where it's located at the base of a slope or something like that. So when you are looking at, and first of all, thank you for that map out of home hardening, defensible space, and neighborhood level mitigation. When you're looking at how to analyze risk, can you talk a little bit about that concept of the super spreader and how you prioritize that, and also, you know, address the equities in a particular neighborhood?
Yeah, you know, in our agency over the last year, we've been piloting a tool to help us model risk reduction and to really take into account the structure data, the defensible space data, the landscape data, all these data sets, and merge it together to see what's the best return on investment on projects. But at the granular level, figure out which are the priority homes that need to be hardened. We talk a lot about trying to harden the entire community, the entire neighborhood, but in reality, to your point, the kind of super spreader analogy, you know, by using modeling tools that are really on the forefront right now of really providing some really good insights, we're going to help do that. One of the things we are working on, though, is making sure that this tool is not only being used in our agency across the state. We've just ramped up deploying it in all parts of our organization, but in the next phase, opening it up to partners. So our fire safe counselors, our county coordinators can plug their projects into it. So our ultimate goal is to make sure that risk modeling is driving with a return on investment the projects within our community wildfire protection plans. And then for us, at least our agency has funders, but there are other funders out there, utilities, for example, that we can ensure that the projects that are getting the money are not just equitably spread out, and we use other factors like socially vulnerable and others, but that the return on investment becomes the key. Because right now, and we're very proud of the grants that we've provided, but the Secretary, the comments I love, it's random acts of mitigation. And not to disparage that those projects are not important, but really the amount of dollars available really has to be fine-tuned into making sure that that return on investment is the highest. Ultimately, what our vision right now is to ensure that this work group to develop the strategy from these actions builds out the risk modeling, the common data sets. There are existing platforms that are out there right now, but maybe there are others in the future. We have to have a common set of data that insurance companies, utilities, fire agencies, and everybody is using to really make sure this is meaningful. But that is the ultimate goal for us.
May I tack on a little bit on this one? The modeling data says you don't have to do everything everywhere. Each action starts to begin to flatten the curve and turn that work down to, amplify the overall work. I think though, when you have the neighbor that is recalcitrant, that is, where we fixate, we have to be able to do the work ourselves first. We have to be able to demonstrate that we're capable of doing the work and inspire them to understand that what they do matters, and then also be willing to lean in and ask them, do you need some help? What's going on? Maybe there's some barrier that we don't know about and we don't understand. And so we begin to put judgment on their recalcitrance without really leaning in and trying to understand what the issues are. So we've got to use our social tools to be able to think about how we lift everyone as a community and understand what those barriers may be and try and figure out how to make it easier for everyone.
Yeah, I might add that what we found with this enhanced resilience site framework, it was an unlock. I mean, essentially you could work with 2 or 3 landowners, and the landowner that had property but didn't have the means to do the work suddenly was viewed differently by the landowners that did have the means. And we were able to raise donated funds, or even a landowner that had the means might be willing to figure out a way to help that landowner that didn't have means. You're only as safe as your neighbor. Essentially, it boils down to that. So By building this framework of the combined different kinds of funds, the landowners investing their own funds, any grant that we control, influence, or aware of, making sure that qualified landowners access it, and then the donated funds, we've been able to unlock a number of these projects. We thought it was going to take 10 years to develop 100 of these things. We already have 225 in our first year of enrolling landowners. So we'll probably build 450 of them in 3.5 years. And so the big unlock is probably 40 or 50% of those landowners have their property wealthy but means challenged. They don't have the funds to do it, but we've been able to sort of optimize the mix of funds and unlock those to help those landowners get the work done.
Tony.
And I just want to add, let's going beyond the sort of the structural components. Let's also not underestimate the value of community organizing. As me and my team have been just head down on the regulatory process, my inbox has also been flooded with these incredible stories about communities coming together and helping one another. I think even Chief Berlant, I think I saw your skills with a shovel on social media. So, as we're thinking about the structural elements, I've been inspired by how communities are also coming together. It's going to take some time, right? But how they're coming together to help one another. I think 400 folks showed up in the rain in Berkeley to help folks who were unable to do their own zone zero work. I mean, those are the kind of stories I love hearing as part of this.
It's such a good point. Joe, I want to ask you about the insurance companies. A couple of years ago, this task force met in the county of Marin, and I remember we had a really good discussion with some representatives from the insurance industry to understand, like, at that point, it seemed like there was, the state, was not as far with developing models that really are dependable in terms of identifying risk reduction by in-community mitigations. And it seemed like insurance companies were using their own models, and it didn't feel like we were there toward connecting specific mitigation activities with reduced insurance rates. But somehow you've actually made this connection. So what would you share with us, and what can we learn from this?
Yeah, so part of what we realized, we worked with about 50 different insurance companies. These are admitted, non-admitted, excess and surplus. And what we found is that many of these, pretty much every single one of them said that they don't like their models, but it's what they have. And so what we found is that they're interested in a better understanding of contextualized risk. Wildfire is a very unique peril. It has a binary outcome. Either your structure is destroyed or it's likely to survive. It's unlike any other peril where you have some distribution curve of, damage and repair or whatever. And so that's pretty unique. And to help them understand contextualized risk, we had to basically inform them about what these mitigations were and how the firefighters think about containing wildland conflagration. I have to add that, the insurance issue is very complex. So I'm not going to claim that what we're working on is going to sort of resolve all these issues. It does seem to be meaningfully moving the needle on rural properties and HOAs. So what we think about is properties that are held in some kind of a corpus, whether it's an LLC, a trust, or a commercial property, large estate, medium estate, small estate, and HOAs. You have a different approach of sort of thinking about how people organize and how you can kind of measure the outcomes. What we're in the process of doing right now is looking at specific and buffer, because an enhanced resilience site is not going to be a 1/4 acre lot. It's going to be a 50 to 500 acre lot with multiple parcels, roaded infrastructure, water, areas of fuel mitigation, good staging, topographical significance. But if we can build these buffered mapped areas around an HOA and a population density, these insurers think differently about the contextualized risk of those areas. So it seemed to me, as we worked with them, they were really hungry for better information about how to understand risk associated to this, what is a fundamental binary outcome, destruction or not, and how these resilience investments actually translate into a better outcome when it comes to a fire. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. Got the high sign from Patrick that we need to move to a break. We're going to do a 5-minute break. We'll be here. We'll start back promptly in 5 minutes for our last panel.